Okay, so imagine this. The sun comes up, normal day, right? But something's off. There's this, like, global quiet. In Tokyo, a little girl, Aiko, she reaches for her mom, but there's just nothing there. Empty space.
Wow.
Then you've got Dr. Sato in his IVF clinic. Total chaos. Half the genetic material he works with just gone.
The very foundation.
In Nairobi, phones are dead links. Boys trying to call their sisters mothers. Silence. And Maria Costa in Sao Paulo just trying to grasp it. A whole gender vanished.
It's a really arresting way to start thinking about it.
So that's the thought experiment we're diving into today based on this piece, A World Without Gender. What actually happened?
Exactly. And it's important to stress, this isn't prediction, obviously. It's a hypothetical scenario.
tool.
A tool, yeah, to sort of unpack how deeply interconnected everything is, our biology, society, culture, all of it. Our mission here is really to trace those connections, the whole cascade of effects.
Okay, so let's start right at the bottom layer. Biology. I mean, obviously natural reproduction just stops. Full stop.
Right, that's the immediate, unavoidable consequence.
But the source goes deeper, talking about epigenetic symbiosis. What's that about?
Yeah, so it's not just the genes themselves, like the DNA sequence. It's about how those genes are expressed, turned on or off.
Oh.
And apparently both the maternal and paternal contributions have unique roles in regulating that expression, especially during development. It's a kind of genetic teamwork.
Teamwork? Like how? Can you give an example?
Sure. So the text mentions placental mammals. Often, paternal genes push for more nutrient allocation to the fetus, maximizing its growth.
Right, makes sense.
But maternal genes then have to kind of counterbalance that, regulating the mother's immune system so she tolerates the pregnancy without rejecting it, but also doesn't get overwhelmed. It's this incredibly fine-tuned balance.
And you lose half of that balance instantly.
Instantly. The whole system is thrown off. Relying purely on artificial tech wouldn't necessarily replicate that intricate dance.
The source mentioned research from the Babraham Institute about memory markers.
Yes, that's fascinating. They found that sperm and eggs carry these unique epigenetic memory markers. Think of them like little sticky notes attached to the DNA.
Okay. Telling the genes what to do.
Pretty much. Instructions for when and how strongly to be expressed later on. If you lose an entire set of those instructions, well, you might lose crucial pathways for things like neural development or metabolic health.
Like having half the instruction manual missing for building a person.
That's a good way to put it.
And it's not just our own cells, is it? The microbiome comes into play too, that whole world inside us.
Absolutely. Our hormones, which differ significantly between the biological sexes, are constantly shaping that microbial community in our gut.
How so?
Well, estrogen, for instance, seems to influence the microbiome in ways that might offer some protection against things like Parkinson's or cardiovascular issues.
So in a male-only world.
You could potentially see a spike in those conditions.
Yeah.
And conversely, maybe losing testosterone's influence could affect resilience to certain pathogens in a female-only population.
It's like vulnerabilities popping up on both sides.
Exactly. And then there's the gut-brain axis.
That connection between digestion and mood.
Right. And if the microbiome gets disrupted because the hormonal landscape changes so drastically, it could destabilize that gut-brain communication,
Leading to?
potentially a nasty feedback loop. Physical problems may be triggering psychological distress, which then makes the physical stuff worse, and, round and round it goes.
It's kind of unsettling how deep these connections go. Even that lizard example was weirdly relevant. The whiptail lizard.
New Mexico whiptail, yeah. All female, reproduces via parthenogenesis, basically virgin birth.
But they still do something like mating.
They do. Pseudocopulation. One female acts like a male, mounting another. And this behavior actually triggers the hormonal changes needed for ovulation and egg development.
So even without males, they need the ritual.
It seems so. Which suggests that even if humans manage artificial reproduction in a single-gender world, we might still need some kind of social or behavioral trigger, a performance almost, to make the biology work.
Blurring the lines between biology and behavior. Okay, so the immediate biological fallout is huge. What about the longer term? The genetic future? The source seemed pretty concerned.
Definitely. Big concern is the genetic bottleneck. Sexual reproduction does this amazing thing where it shuffles the genetic deck every generation.
Mixing things up.
And it helps reset telomere length. Those little caps on the ends of our chromosomes. They shorten as cells divide, which is linked to aging.
Like Dolly the sheep aging prematurely.
Exactly. Cloning and potentially some artificial gamete methods might not reset those telomeres properly.
Yeah.
So you could face, like, accelerated aging across the whole population over generations.
A species-wide ticking clock. That's grim.
It is.
What about the proposed fixes? Making genes from scratch. Ultra-safe cells.
I mean, the technology is incredible to think about. Synthesizing whole chromosomes,
Yeah.
cells resistant to all viruses, sounds amazing.
Right.
But the risk is creating a genetic monoculture. Everyone becomes too similar. Remember the Gros Michel banana?
Yeah, you mentioned that. Wiped out by one fungus.
Because there was no diversity. Same principle could apply here. A new disease, an environmental shift. And we'd be incredibly vulnerable if we're all genetically alike.
And there are examples in human populations too, right? The source mentioned Japan's Jomon people.
Right. Relatively homogeneous populations sometimes show higher susceptibility to certain diseases because their gene pool is less diverse. A single-gender humanity would, by definition, have reduced diversity.
So more vulnerability. Okay. What about the really out there ideas? Xenotransplantation, chimeric embryos.
Using animal parts or creating human-animal hybrids. I mean, these are frontiers being explored now, but they come with huge risks.
Such as?
Well, one thing highlighted is the discovery of ancient viral DNA just sitting dormant in our own genome. HERVs, they're called.
Viruses hiding in our DNA.
Yeah. And sexual recombination, that shuffling process we'd lose, might actually play a role in keeping them suppressed. Take that away.
And they could wake up.
It's a possibility. You could unleash pandemics from our own genetic code, like medieval-level plagues.
Okay, that's terrifying. So humanity could end up some kind of hybrid species just to survive. Part synthetic, part organic.
It really pushes the definition of human, doesn't it? Extreme circumstances might force us down paths we can barely imagine right now.
Let's shift gears a bit. Away from the genes and cells, what about the emotional side? The psychology of it all. Losing half the human equation must have a massive impact there too.
Oh, undoubtedly. The source talks about neurochemical reciprocity. Think oxytocin, the bonding, trust hormone, and vasopressin, also involved in social bonding.
Okay.
In a mixed-gender society, the interplay between how these chemicals work, maybe slightly differently on average, creates a kind of social-emotional ecosystem. Upset that balance?
And what happens? What would it look like? More aggression or something else?
Well, the speculation is, in male-dominated groups, you might see heightened competition, maybe less empathy, more conflict.
Okay.
In largely female groups, maybe a risk of what the source calls oxytocin burnout, like an overwhelming pressure for communal harmony and caretaking that becomes stressful in itself.
So different kinds of potential breakdown.
Possibly. And look at the Mars 500 experiment, that long isolation study.
That show.
Mixed gender crews actually seem to cope better with the stress and confinement than the all-male crew. Suggests diversity offers resilience.
Different strengths, different perspectives maybe.
Could be. Then there's the Jungian angle the source brings up, anima and animus.
Carl Jung. The inner feminine in men and inner masculine in women.
Exactly. And Jungian theory suggests integrating these inner opposites is key for psychological wholeness.
So if the outer opposite disappears?
The argument is it could lead to a kind of collective psychological stagnation, like the internal dialogue falters. The source uses an art analogy, like having only cubism, all sharp angles, without impressionism's softer forms, or vice versa. You lose the contrast, the tension that creates a richer whole.
An internal imbalance mirroring the external one. That's potent.
It is. And it makes you wonder how a single-gender culture would try to compensate, maybe through stories or myths.
Like the Kung San example, their stories emphasize interdependence.
Right. They weave male and female roles together. But in a world without one gender, would those stories become distorted, idealized, or maybe even demonized?
Pathological folklore, the text called it.
Yeah. Filling the void with either monsters or impossible saints. Neither is healthy for adapting.
This loss of balance feels like it would just permeate everything, including how society is structured, governance, hierarchies.
Big time. The source suggests two diverging paths. For a male-only society, maybe a resurgence of something like tribalism, based on strength, aggression.
Like the Yanomami example, where status is tied to conflict.
Kind of like that, yeah. A potential drift towards dominance hierarchies.
And a female-only world.
Well, the Musu are mentioned with their matrilineal system. Yeah. But the critical flaw highlighted is their reliance on outside males for reproduction, which wouldn't work here.
Right. Obvious problem.
So maybe, in terms of governance, you'd see more consensus-driven models, maybe even hive mind-like. The bee colony analogy was used.
Collective decisions.
Versus the risk in patriarchal models.
Yeah.
Without balancing influences, potentially fragmenting into warlordism or something more unstable.
Neither sounds ideal. What about something basic like education? How do you raise kids?
That's a huge challenge. Finland's gender-neutral pedagogy gets mentioned as a possible model, trying to minimize stereotypes.
But the role model problem.
Exactly. Who do kids look up to? How do they form their identities without seeing that diversity? Even the Swedish hen pronoun experiment showed kids still tended towards gendered play.
So there are deep currents there.
Seems like it. Which leads to the idea of maybe creating artificial archetypes, robots, virtual mentors.
That feels strange. Raising kids with AI role models.
It raises serious questions about authenticity, identity formation. Could an AI really provide what a human role model does? We don't know.
Okay, let's talk money. The economy. Losing half the population, specifically one gender, must cause absolute economic chaos.
Oh, catastrophic.
Yeah.
Think about consumer markets. The source cites figures like men driving most car purchases, women dominating spending on, most other consumer goods.
So entire industries just collapse overnight.
Pretty much. Tech gadgets, maybe bourbon if women disappeared.
Yeah.
Healthcare, fast fashion if men did.
Yeah.
It's a massive, immediate shockwave.
And all the marketing, product design, retail infrastructure built around those differences.
Obsolete. Worthless. And then there's the weird idea of black markets emerging.
For what?
Gendered nostalgia. Things that were commonplace, a specific perfume, a type of tool, whatever, suddenly become rare, valuable relics. Like forbidden historical artifact.
Wow, Old Spice becomes like a Fabergé egg.
Kind of. Speculative value based on lost identity.
And the workforce, how does that adapt?
Well, the source speculates about cyborg augmentation becoming more necessary. Maybe men using exoskeletons more for heavy labor, citing potential pain tolerance differences.
Really?
Speculative, but plausible. Maybe women dominating fields needing extreme precision, like microsurgery.
But isn't automation taking over a lot of jobs anyway?
That's the other layer. Automation might accelerate, potentially erasing jobs and the kind of cultural nuances different people bring to them. Think about the Hollywood AI scriptwriting concerns.
Or losing the human touch.
So you might end up with a highly automated, less diverse workforce adapting to the single gender reality, but maybe losing something essential in the process.
And universal basic income in that context.
It gets complicated.
What?
UBI pilots like Give Directly in Kenya are interesting, but if your economy has shrunk and lost its diversity,
UBI might just be managing the decline.
or a tool for control,
Yeah.
less about empowerment, more about just keeping a lid on things in a stagnant system.
Okay, but crisis breeds invention, right? This kind of cataclysm would surely spur massive technological leaps. The source mentions quantum reproduction. Seriously.
Okay, yeah, that one sounds like pure sci-fi, but the idea is rooted in real physics, quantum entanglement.
This spooky action at a distance.
Right. So theoretically, if you could entangle and then replicate the quantum state of DNA remotely, you could potentially create offspring without physical gametes.
Teleporting genes.
In a manner of speaking.
Yeah.
Highly speculative, obviously. But the 2022 Nobel for Entanglement shows these concepts aren't total fantasy. But then the philosophy.
Is a quantum clone conscious? Is it the same? Yeah, deep questions.
Very deep. And then there's neural lace.
Brain implants, like Neuralink.
Exactly. The idea here is, could you use that tech to simulate the missing gender's perspective? Like, have an AI coprocessor in your brain that offers the counterpoint, the missing instincts or emotional responses.
Whoa, a society of cyborgs haunted by digital ghosts of the other gender.
It's a pretty striking image, isn't it? A constant internal echo of what was lost.
And the link to Japan's herbivore men was interesting. Men opting out of traditional roles before any cataclysm.
Yeah, it's seen as maybe a sort of unintentional preview, a cultural shift towards less defined gender roles, potentially amplified massively by technology in this future scenario, maybe leading to an androgynous monoculture.
Wow. Okay, so the culture itself would fundamentally change. Language, for starters.
Oh, hugely. Gender's baked into so many languages. Think honorifics, Mr., Mrs., Miss, Sir, Madam.
They'd probably vanish, replaced by neutral terms.
Seems likely.
Yeah.
Which might flatten hierarchy, maybe, but also maybe flatten identity, lose nuance. Some languages like Navajo handle gender differently, more fluidly in verbs, so maybe there are templates. But you'd expect resistance too.
Linguistic rebellions. And even emojis, purging the little gendered figures.
Sounds trivial, but it's another layer of expression of representation just gone. Reduced.
And religion. How do major faiths cope?
Massive challenge. The source mentions the Vatican looking at AI for confession, showing some tech adaptability.
Yeah.
But like, A maleless Catholicism. How does that work theologically with an all-male priesthood?
Or other faiths with gender-specific roles or deities?
Big questions. Though some, like Shinto with its genderless kami spirits, might adapt more easily.
And art, music.
Might turn inwards towards absence. The idea of voidism in art, like Rachel White Reid's work, casting empty space.
Art about the missing piece.
Yeah. And music might abandon gendered vocal ranges, maybe move towards AI-generated frequencies, something totally non-biological, a completely different soundscape.
This all leads to some really heavy ethical territory. The right to even exist comes into question.
For sure. You've got the voluntary human extinction movement folks who argue we should stop reproducing. Now, imagine that choice is forced upon you by this crisis.
Suddenly, it's not abstract philosophy.
Not at all. The source posits a hypothetical UN summit, like the nuclear non-proliferation talks, but about whose genes get carried forward, who gets to represent humanity's future.
God, the politics of that. Would individualistic cultures choose extinction over forced survival? Would collectivist ones mandate carrying on no matter what?
Huge unknowns. And then the cloning rights issue, given history.
Like biopiracy, indigenous groups might refuse to donate DNA for cloning efforts.
Very possibly. Understandable caution about their genetic heritage being exploited again. And flip side, corporations might try to patent resilience genes found in the lost gender.
Creating genetic haves and have-nots, neo-eugenics.
Exactly. The source mentions a fictional film, The Mendel Directive, capturing that fear of genetic serfdom. Massive ethical minefields everywhere you look.
It's a bleak picture in many ways, but the ending of the source material offers a slightly different take, focusing on a new generation, Gen Z synthetics.
Yeah, it pivots slightly. It paints a picture of young people, born into or growing up just after the collapse, who aren't just victims but agents of change.
How so?
It gives examples like a biopunk collective led by a young woman, Zara Ibrahim, 3D printing ovaries, or a teen coalition pushing for a global reproductive equity act.
So they're not just coping, they're actively rebuilding, rewriting the rules.
Using the tech and the crisis itself to forge something new. It's a note of maybe not optimism, but resilience and ingenuity.
But that haunting question remains, doesn't it? Are they trying to save humanity as it was, or are they actually birthing something totally different?
That's the core of it. And the mention of the first CRISPR-edited babies, conceived without gendered input, just labeled Precursor A and Precursor B.
Yeah, no mother, no father in the traditional sense. A completely new kind of ancestry.
It puts us right at what the source calls the post-gender horizon, where survival might mean letting go of the very duality that, made us who we are for millennia.
So the final thought it leaves us with is, do we embrace that future, become something fundamentally new, or do we risk becoming just a relic?
A fossil species defined by a duality we couldn't live without. Yeah, it's a profoundly challenging question to sit with.